Welcome to AML Conversations, the Solution Series. This podcast series focuses on practical information about solutions to challenges you face in your financial crime compliance program. These solutions include managed services, technology, advisory, and third-party risk management. You can access this series and other AML Conversations and This Week in AML podcasts at our website, amlrightsource.com, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome back to the Solution Series. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how AI can be leveraged for the compliance function. Joining me is David McLaughlin, our Executive Vice President of Technology Sales, and of course, Leandro Loss, our Principal Data Scientist.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Dave, could you please provide our listeners with a brief introduction to your background and expertise?
Sure. I think the most relevant part of my background is I spent, before I founded QuantaVerse, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, I spent about 20 years in financial services technology, both in development of the technology, guiding development, as well as marketing the technology, sales, and working with customers to understand what their needs of the technology were to help sort of create a roadmap and then go sell the products that the firm I was with created. In 2014, I founded QuantaVerse, which was an AI firm specifically focused in the financial crime compliance space, anti-money laundering, to be very specific. And it was, an output of that 20 years of work that I had done working with financial services and understanding the challenges that they faced. And I just saw a huge opportunity in the compliance space and in anti-money laundering. This is on the heels of huge fines, $2 billion fines, $9 billion fines that global regulators had placed on large banks. And their reaction to those fines were to throw people at the problem. While certainly that's a viable answer, and part of an important answer, there was also technology that I believe that we could develop to make that process work better, faster, cheaper. And so QuantaVerse was founded with the intent to enable financial institutions to leverage the technology to make their people better at finding and reporting on potential financial crimes and money laundering, as well as to sort through the huge amounts of false positives quickly so that they didn't waste their time investigating legitimate customers and the transactions of those legitimate customers. So we founded 2014. In August of 2021, just over 2 years now, AML RightSource acquired our firm because that vision made sense with their business. A large managed services provider, one of the best in the world, with a lot of investigators that could use better technology to complete their mission in a more effective manner. So they acquired us in 2021, and Leandro was with QuantaVerse, and all the folks from QuantaVerse have come over and continue to develop the technology that our people are using.
Thanks, Dave. I think that sets a nice foundation for our conversation today. I know you are both pretty passionate about AI being used as a tool to improve efficiency. So how does AI support human investigations and the compliance function?
Yeah, I'll take a start at this, Leandro, and I have to, it's a great question, and I have to almost bifurcate the answer between how it can effectively work today and what the future looks like. And the reason I answer it that way is because the changes in AI technology today that is going on are radically different than when we started the firm in 2014, 8 years ago. 8 years is not that long a time, but the development of AI technology today is completely different. If I'd started QuantaVerse today, it wouldn't look anything like what we started in 2014. It's that much of a sea change. So, when we started the firm, it was rules-based detection engine. And we all know the challenges with a straight rules-based detection engine. It creates a lot of false positives. And we developed QuantaVerse, and there are fantastic capabilities in place today, state-of-the-art, that are able to provide an investigator with the data that they need, the specific data that they need around an alert, as well as an analytics capability of that data that's been acquired, so they can quickly make the decision of whether something is a false positive or a false negative. So that sea change from rules models to AI models was generational in its impact. The changes now from AI models to the use of large language models are an exponential change on that previous one. And so let me just give you an example. The way that it works today, very viable, very effective. If let's make a scenario up. I have a son that lives on the West Coast of the United States, struggling actor. I'm making this up, fictional. Struggling actor, and I'm supporting him to survive, and I send him $10,000 every single month. In the old rules-based world, that $10,000 transaction might trip a rule about round dollars. The rule would say any round dollar you see, you create an alert and a human has to investigate. Even though I do it every single month to send my son money to support it. What an AI model would look at is the history of those transactions to see if they've changed in frequency, see if they've changed in volumes. They would look at my son as the counterparty to the transaction to see if there's a relationship, which there would be, both financial as well as a human relationship. And they might potentially look at any media in the environment about my son or myself that might be negative, that might indicate some sort of nefarious activity. So, a very effective way to do work that an investigator might have to sort through both internal data as well as Google data, as well as adverse media data to come up with an answer. Again, state of the art today, very effective. What the future of this looks like is that if we look at just that natural language processing to create adverse media as one example, the way that was created, the way that QuantaVerse created that technology was to spend hours, and Leandro can put color on this, hundreds, thousands of hours, tens of thousands of hours annotating the English language. We had people, I did it myself, much to Leandro's chagrin, would go in and make annotations to text to train the model what was appropriate or what it was reading versus what might indicate risk. Large language models, LLMs, have gotten rid of the need to have linguists, professional linguists, or laymen like myself annotating models. So the development is much quicker. The accuracy, based on the trillions of sentences and words that large language models have trained on without annotations, is much more accurate. So the rate of false positives is much lower, and the identification of criminal behavior is much more accurate. So the reason I say this is, the reason I bring this up is, as great as QuantaVerse is today, and we are the technology, the AI technology at AML RightSource is what I believe far superior to other AI technologies in the space. The development that AML RightSource is putting into this today is going to make this radically different in the future. And here's the bottom line of that radical difference. Today, it is the AI models pushing information out to the investigator. Valuable information that they can use, information that speeds their investigation, information that makes it more accurate and allows them to make a determination. In the future, that human is still part of this process. but now they will be able to interact with the artificial intelligence. Instead of information being pushed to the investigator, now the investigator will be able to interact in a way that suits the investigator. So this is the future. Imagine being able to now ask your computer, okay, Dave's son is in the West Coast pursuing an acting career, and he gets a $10,000 check from his father every month. Is there any indication that he has been is actually in the acting business? Does he have an agent? Has he been in commercials? There's a question and answering that now the investigator can do to get better information at their fingertips. And so any company that is developing NLP the old way that we did in 2014, 2015 is a dinosaur smoking cigarettes. They are dead in 3 to 5 years. This technology is going to be so different, and it is going to be so dependent. It's so dependent not on the model that was created. 2014, 2015, we created NLP model, natural language processing model. It is now dependent on the knowledge that the firm has to build the LLM or to fine-tune the LLM or to use contextual data for the LLM. And that's where AML RightSource shines. We are a business, we are a company that is built on investigators investigating money laundering, fraud, and financial crimes. We have a huge base of knowledge that we are able to use to make our large language models the best in the industry. We have subject matter experts that aren't tech people. John Byrne, probably the most world-renowned expert in anti-money laundering, is a part of our knowledge base to build these LLMs, these large language models. So this new world of language models being utilized to improve the accuracy, speed, effectiveness of any use case, but in particular clients in our conversation, compliance and anti-money laundering, requires what RightSource has and what no other technology provider has. And that's knowledge bases and that's expertise. And so we think we are on the forefront. We believe we're on the forefront, and we believe that we are uniquely positioned to drive the change, take the change that is happening in the AI world and make it usable to our customers. It's a little bit long answer, but I had to differentiate between the world today and where this is going because it's so exciting and it's so important. And the answer to your question of how is a human involved in compliance, they're now going to interact. That's how they're going to be involved in the technology of the future.
I'd like to get into the detail a bit more, and perhaps this is a question for you, Leandro, but how do we develop our AI solutions, and how do they find a case of money laundering, human trafficking, or even adverse media?
Well, Dave set the bar really high here. He's already setting like technology that is months old, So I will, however, step back and keep with the line of explanations that I was giving before by breaking down this technology into tools inside the toolbox. And I'm going to place the technology that we've mentioned, the large language models, the GPT and whatnot, into that toolbox that, in this case, it's a tool inside the machine learning or the deep learning and the AI box. And I'm going to place it inside, the steps that I'm going to provide in my answer now. So, Rachel, as usual, I start with my disclaimer. So the answer depends really on the expertise and the experience of whom you're asking. So again, I'm going to give you an answer based on my experience, my familiarity with the problem. And I'm going to do it in kind of a timeline way, meaning that's where I would start and that's how we would finish or deploy the project. I usually start from the expert, okay? So you're talking about money laundering, human traffickers. If I could have a conversation with the criminals, I would sit in front of them and start asking questions. Obviously, we can't do that. So the best we have, and we're very fortunate both with QuantaVerse and AML RightSource, is that we have those experts right here. At the end of an email or the phone line that we can call and ask questions. So why start with them? I think AI, in my opinion, is very powerful if it's oriented or guided, driven by humans. And that's how I start my solutions. It's from the experts. From the experts, we're going to learn, since we're talking about criminalities, right? We're going to talk about red flags, patterns, anomalous behaviors, suspicious behavior, inconsistent behaviors or activities. If we're talking about money laundering, we would be talking about, transactional patterns like pass-through, round-tripping, round dollar, structuring, and so on. Common ownership or relation between the parties, transacting parties. The values, volumes, and velocity, frequency that these transactions are going in and out of accounts. The jurisdictions that are involved, some of them with very loose regulations around transparency and tax evasion and money laundering activity. If we're talking about human trafficking, you have that street level kind of information, like the multiple hotel rooms booked by the same credit card, the late night activity, the small dollar amounts at ATMs, all those are used as how does the expert see the problem? How do they spot the problem, right? Out of thousands, millions of transactions that go in and out of the financial system every day. The next step then, going down that timeline, once you have this understanding of the problem from the best in the field, you go into choosing the tools in our toolbox, in this case, the AI, that was your question, to solve each of those issues, those red flags or suspicious activity. Those could be the use of graphs or networks for transactional behavior, for transactions. It could be time series for values, volumes, and velocity. It could be NLP, natural language processing, when we're talking about news media, the scraping, the analysis of news media and other media, textual media. It could be some unsupervised learning, since we've talked about this already, clustering of business purposes to see what's normal, what's not, right? The next step now, once you have these tools, the AI tools that address every single red flag, okay? These red flags now are different problems, right? How do we tie all this together? Then machine learning comes along, because machine learning is able to get all these red flags and maybe a score about severity or frequency or prevalence of that activity, of their red flag. And it's able to put all together and say, what would be my decision if I saw this, being this type of activity being done in my transactional data. And that decision, where does it come from? We already talked about this. So what would be the input, and the output would again come from the experts, the people who are doing this on a daily basis. So there are two ways. You either look at the historical data, the historical decisions they made, and you say, based on the red flag A, B, and D, they made this decision. This is suspicious. Now, because A, B, and D showed up with E and F, this is not suspicious anymore. And machine learning is able, with its modeling techniques, to tie those two together. So in the future, it is able to, every time it sees that combination of red flags, to give that adjudication that was provided by the expert. And of course, we already talked about the good machine learning that is able to also interpolate and extrapolate from the data that it saw before. So it is really able to mold the decisions around not rules, not by saying $10,000, but a different set of numbers that morph together for that particular typology or criminality, right? So what comes next? So we talk to the experts. We gather some input. The input in this case for the machine learning is really the red flags that the investigators are finding or looking at or looking for. And then you connect to the output, which is, what is this in fact? Is it a case of money laundering, human trafficking, suspicious, not suspicious, so on? Well, the next step now is evaluation, right? How do you know that your machine learning is really up to what humans are doing? So there's evaluations, there's measurements of uncertainties, of biases. We detect weak spots, blind spots. We put guardrails around it to make sure that this thing is not, completely going on tangent on, on incriminating everyone from a certain jurisdiction or type of activity, right? Finally, and of course, in this evaluation, what we found in practice is that, and that connects to the number of false positives that Dave mentioned, is that when you look at these adjudications, okay, it's very clear for the machine, for machine learning, for the model to say, these are obviously suspicious cases or criminal cases. And also on the other extreme, it could say, these are obvious non-criminal activity. And then there's this gray area. And yes, nowadays you have large language models, you have other technology that could make that adjudication automatic, except that the industry is not ready for automatic decisions on suspicious activity or not. So what we do is that instead of giving all these decisions, including the easy ones, we take the easy ones out, the ones that are basically a replication of what happened in the past, both in the input and the output. So you don't need to make that decision again. But if there is any variation that go beyond, statistically speaking, from what you've seen before, we call that a gray area, and we can present back to the experts. So now the experts do not have to handle with 1,000 cases a day. They handle maybe 300, 200. I'm talking about the team, of course. That the machine was able to filter through and say, these are ones that, I could take a guess on it, but I'd rather give it to you because we're trying to do responsible decisioning here. LLMs as a tool, it's a great tool. It's the biggest power, I believe, it's the ability to communicate with human beings in their own game, in their own language. The LLM is able to put information together, both from the internet and from its own reasoning, to understand, create this type of relationship for you. So it's a great tool. Dave spilled the beans a little bit. We are developing tools, powerful tools, using that powerful technology. And the results are amazing. Yeah, there is no reason for us to go back to 2014 model and try to improve on that when you have better technology today.
And so also, think about that for a second of that ability to interact on a broader scale than used to happen. So, for example, I've in the course of building a company, talked to literally thousands of investigators about their jobs and what they did, how they did it. And there's several themes in those conversations that came out. Mundane, repeatable tasks that took all of their day, searching Google, so on and so forth, that current AI has solved. Regulators following a review that is process-oriented and not results-oriented was a common theme that I heard from leadership of a compliance organization. But another one that doesn't get talked about as much is a lot of people investigators feel alone in the world. And what I mean by that is they have their set of facts and they have their peers inside the walls of the organization that they can talk to. They have the supervisors they can review things with. But besides the RFI process, there was no way to look outside of their organization to understand a bigger picture of what the transactions that they're seeing mean. So, most of the times when a criminal is laundering money, they're not laundering it through one organization, they're laundering it through several organizations. And what the investigator sees is a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, and only one piece of that jigsaw puzzle. And they don't know how that piece of that jigsaw puzzle fits into the whole puzzle, or the whole picture. Now, okay, with the training of these future technologies, with the use of these future technologies, it is very easy for an investigator to ask, to prompt an LLM, a language model, with the information and the facts that they have, and immediately get a very clear view on how that might fit into a large transnational money laundering scheme, and not feel like their one little piece might be legitimate or it might be illicit and they can't really tell, and they're relying on maybe some bad NLP tools that have been developed that create a ton of false positives and the adverse media that they're looking for because it was based on linguists that were annotating, or it's a model that has been left to not get updated and is no longer providing relevant information. There's an ability now to go outside of the walls of an organization to quickly retrieve accurate, up-to-date, relevant information about the case. Well, the only tool that they had to do that in the past was an RFI, which you get 9 out of 10 times you don't get an answer. So that the ability to stitch together a view of outside of an organization is something that's going to provide an investigator an ability to identify financial crimes and money laundering much quicker, much more effectively than they were able to in the past.
What a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive. Exactly right.
I guess following on from this, can AI learn a new red flag or typology, and how does it do this?
Well, you can basically approach it the same way you did as I described above, right? Or before. You start from the experts again. They detected a new pattern. You talk to the AI experts. They devise new technique, new tools. They improve the red flag detection approach. They improve their machine learning model to now incorporate that new input, and you get the output. I'll give you just an example that it was interesting because it was right after we created this new capability to our system 5 years ago. We found this sore thumb on the data. So we built this system, a clustering system that would analyze the transactions between lines of business. So the idea was can we look at historical data and determine what's normal and what's not normal in terms of transactions between corporations, right? So let's say, if you're a car parts and you send tires to the automaker, that would be okay. But if you're a banana exporter, all of a sudden you're sending $1 million to a car parts, that thing you haven't seen a lot in the past. The first thing that popped out was computer company in Germany sending consistently and lots of money to a casino in Saipan. And then there was, of course, one red flag that said, hey, this thing is very anomalous. We haven't seen before. Put it together with the fact that the owner of the company was a German politician, and there was other transactions going into his account. There's this whole story of how he was laundering money through Saipan that 6 months later came out on the news. The FBI just raided the place and so on. So one thing that I want to say is that you can start from the human beings, but the human beings can be assisted by the AI that is solving the problems. Why? Because between the lines here, when I say that that AI is modeling a pattern, a behavior, that also means that AI is detecting the boundary between what's normal or not normal and the unknown. There's always this area that he hasn't experienced before. That's the outlier for the statistical system. So what we do is that every time we run our system, we have a little log that logs behavior that hasn't been seen before, statistically speaking, based on the distance to that model. That's the uncertainty to say, let's say you're an autonomous car and you're driving this road, and then there's a situation that you've never driven before. You've never seen that in your training data. You have the ability to say, driver, take back the seat, take back the wheel, because I don't know what I'm doing here. So it reports its uncertainty. That can be driven back to the expert to say, oh, no, this is normal. It's just that it's very rare and you've never seen before. Or he says, wait a minute, this looks like a new pattern that criminals could be employing. So absolutely, AI is there to learn new red flags, typologies, and automate the process, the laborious process that the human being, the investigator, would have to go through.
And it can happen in much more quickly than without an AI tool. So, again, before, to identify new typologies and new threats that criminals were engaging in, it goes back to the previous conversation about the community interacting with each other. And so that community had to interact with each other to identify patterns that criminals were engaged in that would, FinCEN might put a notice out on, and then someone might write a new rule against, and then a model risk management committee would have to approve, and then it would have to go to QA and testing and deployment, and 3 years later, all of a sudden, the criminals have even gone beyond that typology. So, having an AI machine learning based technology be able to see those patterns much more quickly and develop an ability to say, this looks risky, you should investigate this, without going through that entire multi-year process of getting a rule written and approved and engaged. It's just better for the world. So it is, in addition to, how Leandro said how it happens, it's important to know that it can be really quick in identifying new patterns that criminals are engaged in.
You must hear this a lot, but what if AI gives me the wrong result? What happens then?
I think it's very clear that, humans make mistake, AI makes mistake. I think the issue here, honestly speaking, is really the black boxiness of AI. And people think AI is black box in comparison to a human brain, as Dave said. Ask one investigator to justify why they made a mistake. Now ask 100 of them, 200 of them, 500 of them why they made a mistake. It's crazy, right? The black boxiness of AI can be addressed. We actually addressed, Dave mentioned that we started in 2014, and in 2017, all our AI was explainable already. We devised new ways of determining with the output, with the adjudication, all the parameters, all the confidence levels on those particular red flags. So you would say that this few transactions are suspicious because it's 60% due to round dollar transactions, it's 25% due to adverse media found, and it's this much percentage of other factors that someone could look at. In practice, is really, what are you going to tell the regulator that your AI, what they call today, right? The buzzword is hallucination. When he hallucinates, when he made a mistake. So what are you going to say? Look, this is not an argument today. As I said, since 2017, our company has the ability to explain every single detail, not with neural networks, not with mathematical formulations and parameters, but with human language, the language that the investigator understands, which is, this is the prevalence of these red flags. Here's the piece of evidence. It's 30% adverse media, and here are the links to those media. So you can verify yourself. And as I said prior, you have the clear criminal activity, the clear non-criminal, and the gray area. That's where the evidence and the explanation comes along and can actually explain when and why AI did wrong. We can detect the biases. We can fix the biases with new data, with proper training. Can you do that with a human being? it's harder, right? You have to retrain. You have to have access to the same source of education, of content, of guidelines, which is much harder. So I'll just leave it with that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and has been a question that we've addressed from the day we started the company. And AI certainly does make mistakes. I mean, the false positive rate on a adverse media model that is built with the old NLP is really high. I mean, the annotation of taking a linguist and annotating sentences is prone to error, and creation that error manifests itself in a false positive, which costs the user time and money. So there certainly are mistakes that are made that will, and while there will continue to be mistakes and errors, even with the next generation of this technology, while they will be lower and less, significantly lower and significantly less, there still will be mistakes. So the answer to the question goes to the changing nature of the work of an analyst, of an investigator. I mean, so one answer is what happens when they make mistakes today, right? Humans make mistakes. And when they make a mistake today, hopefully it is caught through some QA review process. And the same happens and would continue to happen in the next generation of this technology through a review in a QA process. So when I mentioned the changing nature of the work, what you can expect for the humans, the investigator and analyst, is to be part of that QA and review process themselves. So we could eliminate level 1 investigations through this new technology, the new generation of technology, offshoring to low skilled and poorly compensated level 1 investigators overseas who are prone to make mistakes, language differences, data differences, whatever the cause of those mistakes, whatever cause of those mistakes. In the future, that will be eliminated. Almost assuredly, that will be eliminated. And what that means is then the analyst that gets a case that has still been through a level 1 screening, but that level 1 screening has been done by the technology, is now the QA for that level 1 screening. Very quickly able to see the results of it, interact with the technology, and make a determination whether, in fact, this is something that warrants a complete investigation, or this is a false positive that no longer needs to be looked at. That will be part of that process. So that changing nature of the work of the investigator will be, okay, how do I QA this level 1 capability? So the human interaction of this will now be much more about QAing and providing expertise and insight than it will be about finding data, Google searching, sorting through multiple false positives of adverse that an adverse media technology will create, and in fact, interacting with the technology to determine what the right and appropriate answer is. That'll be the changing nature of that work, and that's how mistakes will be caught. Now, the last paragraph of the answer to that question, I'm sorry, I'm too verbose today, is when a human makes a mistake, how much do you think they learn from it? Really? I mean, I built my hammer, I nailed a hammer every single day. I never seem to learn how to hammer a nail without pounding my thumb. You know, a machine is trainable. So when a machine makes a mistake and the human acts as QA and as a review process, that goes back into that machine, that goes back into the training of that machine so that those mistakes are fewer and more infrequent than they were in the past. So it is a virtuous cycle when a machine makes a mistake and the human becomes part of the QA process. The investigator becomes part of the QA process.
Before we wrap up this episode, do either of you have any closing remarks or final pieces to add?
Miley, just wanted to sort of reiterate what you said, Rachel. It's a brave new world. I think the changes that we're going to see in this industry and the changes that the AML RightSource are investing in and our unique position to take advantage of these technological advantages. There's no other company that can do what it is that we're doing right now. And I think that's great for us. It's great for our customers. And I think it's great for the future state of this industry.
Sure. So I think my final take is don't let what some sales people, I don't want to attack, maybe I shouldn't say salespeople, but don't let don't take it personal, Dave. But there's a lot of companies that are really good at a tiny piece or a tiny tool, and they tend to dismiss the new technology. When internally, our team has become really good at embracing new technology. We're actually excited about experimenting and devising new solutions with those new technologies. Most of us are scientists. We come from academia. We wanna work on the state of the art, on the edge of the new development. So that's exciting for us. And one thing that we've been very honest from the beginning, and Dave can correct me if I'm wrong, but we basically dropped potential clients because they had dreams that we couldn't address, that the technology wasn't ready for the time. And we're pretty honest to say, look, it can't be done that way. We can do it this way. There are limitations. So we're always honest on what it can do and what it cannot do. And I think that's important. So if you find someone dismissing this new technology because of hallucinations, biases, and this and that, and the cost and this, please take a step back, talk to someone that is more balanced and more fair on their assumptions. And education is key. So our doors are open. If you want to talk about this, I think this podcast is great to display what we usually do in closed doors. So thank you for the opportunity, Rachel.
Great. Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
And with that, we conclude our 4-part AI series. It's also the last episode of the Solution series for 2023. So I just want to say thank you to our listeners for your ongoing support and season's greetings.
Thanks for listening to this episode of AML Conversations, the Solution series. More episodes will be posted in the coming months. If you find this installment interesting, there is more great content at amlrightsource.com. If we can help you with your financial crime compliance needs, schedule a meeting on our website. Together, we can reimagine compliance.